Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 110, Glean. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And we are here in the second mini-series exploring the subject of what we're calling and what others are calling spiritual entrepreneurship or spiritual enterprise or spiritual innovation. These are folks, many of them are rabbis, not necessarily all, who are trying to create new examples of Jewish community, Jewish meaningful experience, Jewish connection, etc., outside of the context of your typical synagogue experience. Some of the innovators that we're talking to actually are leading synagogues, and some of them are leading synagogue-adjacent organizations, and some of them are leading organizations that are not really much like synagogues at all, at least from the outside. We're really interested to explore these types of new initiatives, and we're looking at them in the context of two organizations that are helping these types of new initiatives come about. The last series, we talked to the folks from the Open Door Project, which is sponsored by Moishe House and led by George Wilichowski. And today we are beginning a series looking at organizations sponsored by Glean, which is a program of Klal, the organization that we've talked to quite a few of its leaders over the last few months. And Klal is running something it's calling the Glean Incubator. We're going to learn a lot more about the Glean Incubator from its founding director, Elan Babchuck, who is our guest today. Elan Babchuck is the Director of Innovation at Klal and the founding director of the Glean Incubator, which he describes as an ecosystem of support where spiritual entrepreneurs receive training, coaching, and mentorship. The Glean Incubator includes a variety of consulting and coaching, but it also includes a course in entrepreneurship that's run in collaboration with Columbia Business School. Elan Babchuck has rabbinic ordination from the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, and he also has an MBA. He was the rabbi of Temple Emmanuel in Providence, Rhode Island, where he became the first religious leader to be named one of the city's 10 to watch by Providence Monthly magazine. Elan first got involved with Klal as a member of its Rabbis Without Borders program. We talked with its director, Rabbi Rebecca Sirbu, some months ago, and he's like the guy who loved the product so much that he stopped being only a client and became also a producer. So he came over to Klal and launched the Glean Incubator as part of his work as Director of Innovation. We're really excited to begin this conversation on the work of the Glean Incubator, and we're super excited about the conversations that we're going to be having in the weeks ahead with folks that Klal has been working with in this innovation department. Elan Babchuck, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Well, we've been looking forward to having you. So, it's interesting that Klal has been around for a long time and thinking incredible forward-thinking thoughts, and the Director of Innovation is a new position over there. So it would be great if you could give us a sense of what Klal's ambition is now to be starting an innovation department and to have a Director of Innovation, and what it is that you do there, and what's the landscape that you're addressing.
I was brought on with one particular role in mind, and then that's grown and evolved over time. And that job was really building an incubator. Probably my first 6 months, talked to 150 different entrepreneurs from all backgrounds, all faiths, all domains, and their stories. I tried to just listen to what made them tick, what made them feel like, there's this opportunity in the world that I really just won't be able to live with myself if I don't go for it. So on and so forth. And I did that for about 6 months. And at the same time, talked to a number of different incubators in the Jewish world and the other domains. And I did all of that basically so I can get a real sense of what's happening in the landscape and develop a theory of change that we at Klal could use to apply to the work that we do. And look, the number one job here was, we know that there's an emergent moment. We know that there is an incredible amount of creativity just bursting at the seams, but those seams are on the margins of Jewish life. And I wanted to bring that energy from the margin. I want to bring that energy from the margins into the center. I spend about 50% of my time working inside of synagogues and federations and foundations, and the other 50% working on startups. So as the director of innovation, the first thing I did after those 6 months was began to develop as my colleague Alan Harlem likes to say, throw a sheet over the ghost, to start to give a little bit of shape to how it is that we're going to come alongside these entrepreneurs. How are we going to actually serve them? And the beginnings of the way that took shape were with a conversation with Ashley Zwick. Now, Ashley Zwick is the director of the Lang Center for Entrepreneurship at Columbia University. I had this amazing meeting with her. It was, I live here in Providence, Rhode Island, and I went to New York City, and I felt like I was like a country bumpkin trying to find my way around. So of course I get lost on the train. I'm 30 minutes late to the meeting with this like incredibly important, smart person who could do my job with her hands tied behind her back, so I can pick her brain. And I'm 30 minutes late, and we sat down on the couch. She gave me this incredible tour, and she was so gracious. And when I started talking about the shift in the American religious landscape, about all of the shifts that are taking place, how the world really underneath our feet it's like the tectonic plates just have not stopped grinding against one another, and we are in the midst of incredible movement. She was very taken by it, and she connected me in turn to someone named Jack McGordy, who's the director of global entrepreneurship and also the founding director of Venture for All, both at Columbia Business School. And his own mission is about getting the tools of entrepreneurship into the hands of people who otherwise don't have access to them. And when we had this conversation, he immediately said, "We're going to work together. I'm going to tell you, I don't know how, I don't know when, but we're going to work together." And 2 months later, we had our first cohort of Glean Incubator, with 12 brave, courageous, brilliant, visionary, prophetic rabbis.
One thing that's fun for us as hosts and for our listeners when we're doing all of this is to hear a little bit about the people. I mean, so often folks are excited to talk about the work that you're doing, and it's great to hear about the partnerships you're starting to forge at CLAL with Columbia and otherwise. But why you, Elan Babchuck, at CLAL doing this Jewish innovation stuff? What's getting you to this place that causes you to want to think about any of these questions about the future of religion or Judaism?
It's a great question. By the way, that's also what makes this podcast so special, that you actually you privilege people over programs. And that's one of our values at CLAL. I'll tell you this, most of my Jewish journey happened in a church. So I grew up in the Boston area, and my parents were two of the first, 10 or 20 families to make up the Newton Center Minyan. And it was for, that community itself was built for a number of reasons, but largely because, it's like the Goldilocks story. No, is it Goldilocks? Yeah, the Goldilocks story. They kind of look around. The porridge at this shul was not welcoming, and the porridge at this shul had nothing for recent people who recently moved here from Israel, and this one wasn't good with. And finally, they said, you know what? Why we got enough people around the table to set up chairs and read Torah? Why don't we just make it ourselves? And so it started in a living room. Rabbi Dick Israel and his wife Sherry. Rabbi Dick Israel passed away of blessed memory. And then eventually, when it got big enough, moved to a church. And it was a church in Newton Center. And so most of my formative memories were inside of that church, and my bar mitzvah was under a 30-foot cross. But the reason why I say that actually set me on the path to where I am today is because when you're a part of that Newton Center Minyan, there are some days where you're the rabbi, right? You're just any old person, you're a lay leader, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to give the sermon that day. And that meant that you had to sort of dig deep inside yourself and look for the Torah that was going to speak to you and hopefully to the rest of the folks in the community. And then there were some days where you're the janitor. And that means that you're the one who's cleaning up. You're the one who's picking up the entenmann crumbs from the ground that all the kids dropped all over the floor. And you're the one setting up the chairs and cleaning up the chairs. And I literally grew up inside of an incubator that was the living manifestation of that Hasidic story about the 2 notes in your pocket. Or the Hasidic mandate to every single morning you wake up and in one pocket, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, the world was actually created for me. And in the other pocket, ani afar ve'ever, I'm just but dust and ashes. And it was that type of environment where every single person mattered. But I'd say the next step in the journey, I kind of stumbled into it backwards, and I probably went into it for the wrong reasons. When I was 17, my father was diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor said, he's got about 5 years. And the first 6 months were horrible. I really felt a lot of pressure to be able to support the family and give back as much as I could, or at least, at the very least, support myself. And I was going to college soon thereafter. So I with a good friend of mine, I started this painting company. This felt like the only tangible thing that I could do to solve that problem. And one of the last conversations I had with my father, I had gone out and bought a car that no 20-year-old should ever own. It was too fast. It was too expensive. But, we made a little bit of money in the painting company. And I knew he had come out of remission, and I knew the clock was ticking. And for some reason, it was kind of this misguided attempt to show him that we were going to be okay. And so I went out and I got this car and I drove it home, and it was a 6-speed transmission. And I remember he kind of very gingerly walks out to the driveway. The car it's like this European car. So the car door is really too heavy, and he opens the door and he sits in the car. And then I'm driving like 40 miles an hour, taking turns in like second gear, going crazy. And finally I get back to the house just to kind of show him, look how fun this car is, da 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 da. And I get into the driveway, and I rush around the car, open the door, and help him up. We're now standing between my new car that I bought for all the wrong reasons, from the company that I started for all the wrong reasons, and between that car and the old Volvo station wagon with 200,000 miles on it that he and my mom drove me to soccer practice for many, many years. And he says, Elan, I hope you enjoy this car. And he said, I hope you drive it a little bit slower next time and be safe with it. And I hope you love it and it treats you well. But I just want you to know I was going to give you the Volvo. He knew why I went into that business. He knew why I bought that car, and I didn't even have to tell him. And he was somebody who, sure, lived with regret, made mistakes, but did everything with a whole heart. And I think in that moment, what he was telling me, and maybe this is revisionist history, but it really felt like what he was telling me is, listen, you got to leave this world just a little bit better than how you found it. He passed away about 2 weeks later, and I sat Shiva and I looked around the room. And it was the most uplifted I had felt in 5 years, because I was surrounded by stories, from all the people that we grew up with, surrounded by food. I was surrounded by prayer. And it took a few years to sort of, I was kind of like a pinball bouncing around career-wise until I finally figured out where I needed to be and who I needed to be in the next round of my own life. And that was to put myself in a leadership role where I actually served others, and where I wasn't the one in the front of the room, where I could follow, and where I could help others find their own path and their own Torah. And that's what I do today.
So I know that you went to rabbinical school and business school. Which order did that happen in? And how did you sort of make the transition from going the way that I think typical rabbinical students go, which is that they go and become a congregational rabbi, which you did, and now you're doing this. So how did that part of the journey go?
I had interest in taking some business classes. And while I was in rabbinical school the first year or two, and by the way, I went to the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies largely because it was a place that from the moment I applied made it very clear that I was welcome there, and I was not someone who knew how to lead services, and I wasn't the USY. I went to one USY event and it was terrible, and I never went again. Right, so I was not that straight and narrow person. My first year, I started taking a couple of business classes, just like cherry picking them. I took a class on executive leadership. I thought it would be interesting. I took another class on fundraising. I thought it'd be interesting, mostly just to dabble. And then one Friday night, my second year of rabbinical school, I was crossing the street with my good friend Scott Shaffrin, who's now a rabbi in St. Louis. And
who was my camp counselor.
Oh, that's right. You guys are from the same neck of the woods. Oh, I can see it now. He clearly had a good impact on
For sure.
And my fiance, who later became my wife, Lizzie, and we're crossing the street coming home from a Friday night dinner, and a truck runs a red light and hits all three of us. I was a couple steps ahead. So I kind of got hit right in I went right into the hood of the trunk of the truck, and it threw me about 35 or 40 feet and almost killed me. I was taken to the hospital. We were actually taken to separate hospitals. I didn't have my wallet on me because it was Friday night, and I didn't carry my wallet with me, so I didn't have my insurance or my ID. And of course, we're in Los Angeles, Southern California, so there is literally a section of Cedar-Sinai Hospital for quote unquote cash patients. And we know what that means. And very quickly they as soon as I came to, as soon as I was able to respond to what they had to say, I couldn't move my arms and I couldn't move my legs, and I had all kinds of catastrophic injuries. And I said, where's Lizzie? And they said, well, we can't call her. We just need we need you to sign this form. I said, I can't move my arms. I can't sign the form. And eventually she was able to find me. I left a message on her cell phone because one of the nurses was kind enough to give me her cell phone. And anyway, long story short, I had reconstructive surgery and had to miss quite a bit of school. And I was in a wheelchair for quite a bit of time. I knew that I didn't want to just sit and feel bad for myself the entire time. And frankly, the experience of being treated like an undocumented, like a quote unquote illegal immigrant by the hospital system really woke me up. Oh my God, I'm in the midst of some of the most irresponsible bureaucratic systems that treat people worse than one would treat a dog. And being on the receive. And by the way, not only did I have insurance, I had two insurances, and neither of them covered what I did. I left the hospital 4 days later with about $360,000 of medical debt. And I sat with Lizzie and I sat with my family and tried to figure out, well, what do I want to do in this moment to actually embrace this opportunity? Because no crisis should ever be, every crisis is actually an opportunity to embrace. So I spent the next year working as a community organizer for One LA, which is part of the Saul Alinsky's Industrial Areas Foundation. Spent most of my time during the day in Mid-City and South Los Angeles, and most of my time at night in business school.
So that's an incredible story. I think I'm sure we'll return to it. But so then you end up graduating from rabbinical school and you have an MBA, but then you went to be a congregational rabbi, right?
Mm-hmm. I said, you know what? I know I want to get back to the Northeast. I know I want to be close to family. My wife's family is also from the Boston area, and our son Micah was just. My wife was 8.5 months pregnant as I was going through the placement process. And Micah was born April 15th of 2012, right around the time that we were making all of these decisions. So I knew, you know what, let me at least go to the best community I can possibly find. And I interviewed all kinds of different jobs, Hillels, day schools, synagogues. I want to find the place that really, it feels like the warmest community with the most potential for me to actually engage and bring whatever skill sets and for me to learn. And that really was here in Providence. I worked at a synagogue here in Providence for 4 years and was able, and they, to their credit, gave me an incredible amount of flexibility around trying new things. We were the second synagogue in the country to move to a gift of the heart voluntary contribution model. And in turn, we brought in enough new members to build a separate synagogue if we wanted to. There were that many people who came in, not only because it was cheaper, but because we changed what our value proposition was actually going to be. When you have the conversations with people and try to understand where they're coming from and what they're hoping to achieve, we're not just solving the problem of becoming a member, we're solving the real progress that they're trying to make in their lives. But it was really time for me to move on to what was next. I was sort of at a crossroads in my own life of, okay, I can stick around and maybe be a part of this community for a much longer time. Or now's the time for me to know, okay, I'm not ready to make that type of commitment. Let me move on to what's next. And it all just kind of came together in this very emergent way where the relationships that I had and I cherished from, my year as a Rabbi Without Borders fellow, my relationships with Rabbi Rebecca Serbu and Erwin Kula and Brad Hirschfield, to the Torah that they actually taught me, which was, it took a couple of years to gestate and begin to come to fruition, but it was just starting to blossom at that moment. And that's when I knew that the next step was beginning to unfold. And I didn't know where it was going to take me, but I knew it was time.
What is it that makes the distinction between those rabbis who have the potential to sort of go out and create something entrepreneurial? And then I guess two questions, why is it that some do end up pursuing that direction and are able to bring themselves to sort of leave the congregational rabbinate, and some, I know a lot, feel sort of stuck there and would wish that they could do something else, but they don't end up doing it. And then once those go out and try, what are the obstacles that they face that the Glean incubator was really trying to sort of help them get through to the next stage after having said, yeah, I'm here, I want to found something. But then what has to happen next for that to sort of end up as a valid career for them?
The first thing I'll say is this. In my graduating class, 2012, there were, I don't know what it was, 25 rabbis between the Ziegler School and JTS. I went back and I looked at the spreadsheet. One of the sort of very helpful rabbis who was in placement made a little Google spreadsheet so we could all see who's getting interviews where, and we were very transparent with each other. It was actually one of the most anxious times of our lives, and there was real community built. Anyway, and I look back at who was getting the most calls, like who was getting all the different callbacks to the communities. And I think at this point, of the top 10, just in terms of numbers, this is not scientific, but just in terms of numbers, 7 are already out of the pulpit. That says something. In a lot of ways, rabbinical schools have been training rabbis for jobs that don't exist, right? There's this idealized version, A, of rabbi, B, of institution, and C, of what it means to actually serve people. And the number one thing that happens to assistant rabbis that go into large pulpits, it's not, oh, tell me what's your Torah? Tell me what's the transformational thing that you want to teach that really is going to be infectious? It's how are you going to find young people to fill the seats in the pews? The young people don't wake up in the morning and say, I wish I had a pew to sit in, right? There's not one of them that has that problem to solve. But it just turns out that once you start working for an institution who's really focused on that one metric, or maybe 2, money and members, right? In the Christian world, they say butts, budgets, and buildings. But when you work for an institution that only focuses on those things, well, what you focus on, Adrienne Marie Brown says this in Emergent Strategy, what you pay attention to grows. And if you then focus your entire energy on getting butts in the seats or on recruiting new members, well, then you actually start to objectify the people it was your mission to become a rabbi to serve them. And then when they don't come, you resent them and you feel bad about it, and becomes this really vicious cycle where I've been at board meetings. People start talking about recruiting millennials, but they're talking about millennials like it's a curse word, like if you were to replace the word millennial with any other minority group in America, how would that actually sound? Fill the sentence in. Oh, all millennials are this, all millennials are that. And you start objectifying an entire group or quote unquote a customer segment like that. You're not actually trying to serve them. You're not trying to figure out what makes them tick. You're not trying to figure out what problems they have in their lives and what keeps them up at night, or maybe the inspiration that gets them out of bed in the morning. And you're just trying to get them in the door, because getting them in the door seems to be the job to be done. But there's not one synagogue that was founded in the early 1900s where 4, 5, 6 people created the first board of trustees, put the shovel in the ground to build the building, and said, you know what we really want to do? We want to make sure that 100 years from now, people walk into the building. That's not why they built what they built.
When you are working with these existing congregations, with institutions that maybe they're long-standing, maybe they're newer, I don't know, what are some of the strategies that you're encouraging them to use? What are the ways, the reconceptualizations that you're encouraging them to undertake? And maybe we'll get to this a little later, but maybe how does that dovetail with work you're seeing that's outside of the existing legacy institutions?
In terms of what we do with synagogues and federations and others, I've adopted an approach called the 3-box solution. So the 3-box solution was, it's based on a concept by Vijay Gurindarajan, who's a professor at Harvard Business School. And one of the first test cases was with Hasbro Toy Company. So everyone's heard of Hasbro. The second my plane arrived in Providence, someone, from the synagogue picked me up and handed me a Mr. Potato Head, because that's like the pride of Providence.
Yeah, if you weren't going to name it, I was, because, we got 2 Providence folks on the show for the first time. But
Hasbro Toy Company, the actual history of it is it used to be a textile company. Then it was a pencil company. And then the cost of pencils got too high. So it was a group of brothers, and some of the brothers went off and started making toys, and the others stuck with the pencil company. Right now, over the years in the 90s, if you asked Hasbro, what kind of company are you? We're a toy company. So we are in the toy product business. Now, business started to get real bad about 20 years ago. So what they developed was this model where in box one, we're going to make what we do today to serve today's customers as efficient and effective as possible. We're going to, if it's Mr. Potato Heads, we're going to streamline the Mr. Potato Head production so that we can really get the most out of it and our customers are served best. Box three, we need to start developing some new innovations around our entire business model. So who are we going to serve tomorrow? What are we going to serve tomorrow? Now, anyone can do those two things. Anybody can do those two things. But when we're talking about the religious world, box two is the hardest. Box two is, what do I need to stop doing in order to create the bandwidth so that I can do box one well and I can do box three well? And that's going to be any CEO's job in a moment of change, is going to be, how do I allocate the resources so that I'm not just paying lip service to innovation, but that we're really investing in it. And I don't run away the second we have a failure. I actually embrace it, run towards it, I learn from it. And then I know that by the second and third and fifth and 10th iteration of it, it might actually provide value to the people that we hope to serve. You know, if you ask a rabbi what he or she is doing in the pulpit, it's, well, Judaism is all about transforming people. It's helping make them better people, and so on and so on. A million different versions of that sort of human transformation, right? And I said, well, how do you know if you're doing a good job? What are you measuring? Well, we measure attendance. Okay. So if you are promising transformation and you're measuring attendance, you are in the entertainment industry. You cannot claim transformation when the only way that you know if you're doing a good or a bad job is how many people are showing up. Right? If we're preaching about joy, I want you to measure how many parties your congregants are having. I don't want you to measure, how many people are showing up to your sermon on joy, because at that point you're just measuring attendance at services or how many people want to stay for lunch afterwards.
But in your experience doing this as a congregational rabbi, and then in your experience watching or helping other legacy institutions try to do this, how do they actually move stuff into box two, into that stop doing area? You know, that because I think that the challenge, as I've always understood it from the literature on disruptive or nonlinear innovation, is that the reason why it's so hard to move things into box two is that there's somebody who's a constituent of that work, and there's somebody who's going to be very, very angry if you stop doing anything. Because if you're doing something that literally nobody's participating in, then it's relatively easy to stop doing it. You might have to get over some psychological barriers, but the harder ones are when there's a constituency for some of those things. So, and that's and the reason why a startup is a lot easier is because it doesn't have any constituency yet, and so there's no constituency behind any particular thing, so you can start and stop doing whatever you want at the beginning. So how do you see legacy institutions actually successfully navigate that?
For a lot of people, there's something called an endowment effect, which is that they're going to be a lot less likely to give up what they already have. They're going to value what they already have a lot more than what they might gain, right? And so with the endowment effect in full effect, especially in this moment when there's a fight, flight, or freeze response, and most people are just freezing, right? That what we really need to do is make sure they understand what the actual risks are. You know, I have a friend, Patrick Duggan, who's the executive director of the Church Building and Loan Fund for the United Church of Christ. He stood in front of his leadership. There are 5,000 churches with the UCC, and the Church Building and Loan Fund is an endowment to do exactly what it says. They build churches and they make loans to fix them, right? And he stood up in front of that entire group and said, if we keep going down this path, we will have 0 members in the year 2041. Is it good enough for me to stick with cold comfort for the next 23 years and be just fine and happy doing what I do? And by the way, you're probably not going to be fine and happy because most people walk into a sanctuary and they look at the empty seats, not the full ones. So you're not going to be happy, but you can convince yourself you're going to be for the next 23 years, and then you will be completely out of business. So you need to decide, knowing that, are you ready to go all in or not? There's an incredible amount of pressure on pulpit rabbis in this day and age to deliver box 1 and box 3 with entirely skipping over box 2. There's a whole section in the Talmud about holidays that didn't make it. Rabbi Erwin Kula, as the co-president of Klal, always talks about Yom Nicanor. How many people here still celebrate Yom Nicanor or Yom Taryanus? Well, we don't, because they're not working anymore. So the rabbis were able to say, let's put them to bed. Now, how did they know it was time to put them to bed? Because people stopped celebrating them and their job was done. We don't need to celebrate those things anymore. So I think we need to be real serious about what is actually getting a job done in people's lives.
As I've thought about this stuff, I've been impressed with two ancient Jewish technologies that are involved in this, which I'm not sure really function anymore, and that's part of the problem. One is the technology of studying Jewish texts that we no longer observe. So, reading the whole Talmud, even though much of it has to do with stuff that we don't observe, the sacrifices and whatever, right? And I actually think it's interesting to think about that as a psychological technology that allows us to stop doing things because we know, well, we're at least going to still keep a little bit in touch with it. We're going to study it. We're going to take it seriously. If it ever should turn out that for some reason in the future we need that again, we still know about it because we've been studying it all along. So it's a little bit more okay to stop doing it, and then related to that is the concept of the Messiah, the idea that one day somebody's going to come back and bring all these old discarded lost practices back, again, potentially gives you some psychological relief to say, well, it's okay if I stop doing this because the Messiah will bring it back one day if it turns out that it should have been brought back. Now I'm not really sure that particularly the latter works very well for many Jews today. But I do think it sort of points to the need for sort of practical solutions to some of these things, right? Not just new ideas, but actually practical tools. I mean, I remember I was working once with a couple of synagogues that really should have merged. And one of the reasons why they didn't end up merging was because one of the synagogues had an absolutely stunning building with beautiful stained glass windows. And just, it's sort of tragic to imagine that building would no longer be the synagogue, even though it really had to be in the other building. And I just remember sitting there thinking, like, if we had the holodeck from Star Trek, this problem would be solved. If we could create a true-to-life hologram of this beautiful synagogue, and then you knew that if I ever felt nostalgia for that old, beautiful building, I could just go into this room and switch on something, and I would be there again. And I only need to be there for like 5 seconds and to get that experience that I'm looking for. And how tragic is it that something that needs to be done is not going to be done because some folks need that 5-second jolt of memory. And that's a serious need, but is there some way that we could give it to them in some other way? And so I struggle with this too, like thinking about, well, what kind of practical ideas can we offer people in legacy institutions who feel a strong sense of not only nostalgia, but a strong sense of meaning from many of the things that are done by that legacy institution, but that, as you say, if we charged the people who actually come to Shabbat services, if we actually charged them the membership dues that it costs for their participation, it would probably be something like $10,000 a year.
In the year 70, the destruction of the temple, what would it have been like to be a priest in that moment? It's not just a building. It is literally your identity. You are a priest. Your job is to essentially the governing body of Jewish life in that moment. And it was all going away. So yes, we love to talk about how Yochanan ben Zakkai left Jerusalem, because he had this deal with Vespasian, and he left in a coffin and went to this little town outside of Tel Aviv. And we love to imagine, it's called Yavne. We love to imagine, I talk about Providence like Yavne, and I talk about St. Louis as Yavne because we do work there, and I talk about Phoenix, and I love doing that. But we can't actually start that incredibly difficult work until we can imagine what it was like to talk to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai at that moment as a priest, knowing it was all going away and everything was going to shift. Would you have made that leap? Would you have said, well, yeah, there's a good chance my job is going to be gone. There's a good chance that everything I know about Jewish life is going to be over. But maybe the next couple thousand years are going to be pretty exciting. Maybe people are going to be served. Maybe there's going to be some technologies like the Passover Seder that are actually going to help people experience what it's like to be a stranger in a strange land, right? Maybe, but we don't know. So I think the ones who are successful are the ones who can see it from both sides and have a real passionate, serious, intellectual, thoughtful, emotionally charged argument and discussion about what it's like to be on both of those sides. And until that happens, the people in in legacy institutions are going to resent the entrepreneurs and think, well, they've got it easy, they've got it good because they don't have to do any grief work. And the entrepreneurs are going to look at the legacy institutions and say, oh my God, they have endowments. They don't even know what they're doing with them. I've got this great idea and I have no one to fund it. And we're all going to have this like the Kinat Sofrim, the jealousy among scribes that actually isn't going to be so pure. And one of the most important tenets that I learned as a community organizer is before you can even imagine yourself working in a community, in a neighborhood with a group of people, you actually have to walk the neighborhood many times over. You have to walk the neighborhood in the morning and feel what it's like and what sounds are there and which dogs are barking at you. And you have to walk in the middle of the day and who's at home and who's doing what. You have to walk at night and do you hear gunshots? Do you not? And until you do that, at every single stroke of the clock, you have no business working in that neighborhood. And so for me, what that means, really I see myself as a servant leader, specifically in the margins, is that I want to really understand what makes the people tick who are here, and how can I best partner with them, walk along the journey with them, walk alongside them, and in my role today with Clal, bring all the resources to bear that might help them thrive.
So let's talk about the first iteration of the Glean incubator last year, because we're going to be speaking with a bunch of the folks that were part of that incubator. It's a really incredible group of people. And I'd love to understand in a deep way sort of what was your thought going into creating this, along with the folks at Columbia University Business School, that here's these people, they're trying to do a certain kind of thing in the world, but they've got a block, in front of them, and we want to try to help them get over that obstacle. So how did you look at that landscape then? What was the program that you created to try to help these entrepreneurs, and what did you kind of learn from their experience?
When I became part of Rabbis Without Borders, and I, really started tapping into my own network, talking to these 150 entrepreneurs, specifically the ones that were in the religious world, I thought, oh my God, we are spending so much time embracing this narrative that everything is crashing down that we have completely missed the emergent uptick and groundswell of creativity, of courage, of bravery, of real honest to goodness Torah that's actually helping people, live great lives and become the people that they want to become. People who believe in the transformative properties of Torah. That's Rabbi Sarah Luria for you, who actually, she's crazy enough to think that Torah can actually transform your life. And then she oriented her entire life and her entire work around that concept. Who are the people who are somehow creating beautiful experiences, who are somehow designing transformative rituals, who are somehow building businesses that are actually thriving and serving people, who are somehow living out the Torah that they've been preaching in a way that's authentic and true? And that's how you find a Rabbi Sarah Luria. That's how you find a Rabbi Miriam Turlinchamp, a Rabbi Danny Eskow of Online Jewish Learning. That's how you find a Rabbi Jeff Middleman and Danny, all of the folks. And by the way, Rabbi Macca Wirtz and Rabbi Karen Perelman from congregation from B'nai Jeshurun in Short Hills, New Jersey, who they could coast for the next 50 years and have no problems. The money and members would be just fine. And the two of them are running around with a hair on fire problem that says, oh my God, how can we better serve our people? These are the people who are the prophets in this day and age. And what sets them apart, and I've worked with all the entrepreneurs I've worked with, I think what really sets apart folks like these is that anybody can lean into charisma, and any one of those rabbis I just mentioned can command any size room in front of any group of people. I don't care who they are and when it is, right? But they don't rely only on charisma, because that's not going to be what builds the next round of institutions. Those institutions, unfortunately, and it's sad to say, they're not going to make it in the next round. These are people who can lead from the front of the room, the back of the room, the middle of the room. They have incredible flexibility. These are people who listen before they talk. They listen to the kol d'mama daka. They listen to the still small voice of the people that they're trying to serve, and then they orient their entire work lives around serving those needs.
So you're identifying these incredible people, and what is it that they don't have that you're trying to give them?
I don't care if you're building a widget or an app or a Jewish community. It's really lonely. You spend a lot of time in the margins. You spend a lot of time, just trying to make payroll and just trying to make ends meet and just trying to try. And it's a very lonely job. Now, on top of that, you became a rabbi. You became a pastor. You became whatever it is, whatever kind of spiritual leader you are, you bet your life on it. You are all in on whatever, faith tradition that you're trying to put into action, whatever faith tradition you're trying to live out and help others live out too. And it's not just a product that you're selling. It's something that actually you hold deeply close to your heart and soul. And that's hard to put that on the line. That takes real courage to put that on the line, but it's lonely work. And also, if you're the type of spiritual entrepreneur who's building a community, you immediately will make enemies with almost every legacy rabbi, pastor, I don't care who it is, in the community, because they see a zero-sum pie, and they see that there's one pie, it's not going to get bigger, it seems to be getting smaller, and if you're taking a slice of it, that's less that I get to eat. Okay? Whereas the spiritual entrepreneurs that I work with, they have this abundance mentality that actually anything is possible, and the more that we serve the people that we're trying to serve and live out the Torah, the gospel, whatever you call it, that we really want to live out, the pie is going to grow. Right? There are those folks that look at the American religious landscape and they say, oh my God, 7,000 to 10,000 churches are closing every single year in America, 8 years running. Oh no. And then there are the folks that we work with who say, oh my God, that's 7,000 to 10,000 gorgeous buildings with immense capacity, and 7,000 to 10,000 communities of people that used to come here that might not be getting served right now. And why don't I just spend a little bit of time sitting inside that church, maybe sitting outside that church, maybe sitting in the community coffee shop right nearby and trying to understand what makes the people tick around it. And then maybe there's going to be some way to actually serve those people that used to get served by the church. You have to make sure that every single person you interact with, if there's an opportunity to find that divine spark that they have and create an I-thou. This is a Martin Buber reference, to create an I-thou relationship and not an I-it. Well, if you can build an enterprise, if you can build a venture, if you can build a community that really starts with the search for those divine sparks and giving yourself long enough to get illuminated by that glowing light that comes off of every person you sit with and you interact with, then I think you're actually going to be okay in this moment. And so we try to do that very same thing.
When I hear you mention a coffee shop, I sort of just have to stop and smile, because anybody listening to this who lives in Providence and visits Seven Stars Bakery, it's, a coffee shop in your neighborhood, Elan, they're going to know that you walk the walk on this front, because you're constantly out there in the community of people that you serve, even though at this point, I mean, you used to serve the conservative congregation in Providence, but you don't directly anymore. But still, these are people that you serve as a spiritual leader. And so I'd love to hear from you a little bit on this point you made. What does it mean to be out there in the community? What does it mean to be outside the church or at the nearby coffee shop as you are? Why are you at Seven Stars so frequently, and what do you get out of that experience, and how are you able to serve the people that you interact with in those experiences?
I happen to just love Seven Stars coffee, but I will say this about the coffee shop. I started spending, when I was working in the synagogue my second or third year, about 50% of my time out of the building. And it happened to be that Friday mornings I would go do office hours at Seven Stars Bakery. And the reason why I chose Friday is because it happens to not be a kosher bakery, but it's the only place in town where you can get a decent challah on Friday. So all of these folks who I've never seen before, all of Rhode Island has 19,000 Jewish people. I think Providence might have 9 or 10. And people I never see before. This is not a big city. People I never see before coming into Baichala. And I would sit there, because I study a daf of Talmud every single day. And I sit there sitting in front of my Talmud with my kippah on, and people would come up to me and say, are you a rabbi? And I'd say, yeah, I'm a rabbi. Why do you ask? And they'd say, well, I'm a bad Jew. And I would say, well, what does that mean to you? And I'd say, well, I don't go to services because I don't like going to services. And I'd say, well, don't tell anyone this, but neither do I. And they'd say, well, fine. If you're a rabbi, then and they'd say, what are you reading? And I'd say, I'm reading the Talmud. And they'd say, well, what does the Talmud have to say about my estranged brother? Or what does the Talmud have to say about my mom who's in hospice? Or what does the Talmud have to say about my son who was just diagnosed with special needs and I'm struggling to figure out how to best support him? And it was those conversations. I've built my life around those conversations. Everything I do is because of those conversations. And the day that I stopped going to Seven Stars to be there for people and with people and really listen to what they're struggling with, what gets them out of bed and what keeps them up at night, that might be the day that I stop learning. And it's no coincidence that I study Daf Yomi, where I'm learning Talmud, the words 1700 years old, alongside the new scripture that's getting written today. Because that's the scripture of their lives. And if I'm not listening to them and I'm only listening to the rabbis, and vice versa, if I'm only listening to them and I'm not listening to where we came from, frankly, I don't think my life would be all that interesting. And I certainly don't think I would be serving the people in the way that I'm able to do today.
So we're rounding out towards the close of the episode, and you mentioned that there was a great story that you wanted to tell and share with our listeners. And I wanted to give you a chance to do that before we go, because I think it really is it would be a great note to sort of put the cherry on top of this conversation. So what was the story involving you and your son and a friend that he identified in the parking lot of a restaurant?
After I left the pulpit, it was over the summer, and I was having Sunday brunch with my wife and son, and we were on the water in Warren, Rhode Island. It's this gorgeous background. We're right on the coast, and there's this great brunch place. So we're eating there, and my son kind of looks up, and he's very confused and looks a little worried, and he's looking at the parking lot. And I said, what's wrong, Micah? And he says, and my son's 2 years old at the time, 2.5. And he says, Abba, that poor man. I now see who he's looking at, and it's this guy who's just stepping out of a Bentley convertible. He says, Abba, that poor man. And the guy's got the top down. It's a gorgeous weather. And I said, what poor man? That guy doesn't look poor to me, but what do I know? And he says, that poor man only has half a car, Abba. And he sees the guy has the top down and doesn't have a top. And I said, oh, Micah. And I don't want to correct him now, because I think it's just so beautiful that he's got such compassion for this person. And I said, so what should we do? And he says, well, Abba, we should give him mommy's car. And mommy's got a 2013 Honda CRV. I said, oh, Micah, I think he'll be okay, but it's just so great that you thought of him. And now, it's cute and it's endearing when a 2.5-year-old projects problems onto somebody that they're not really experiencing. But what I found inside, working inside of a synagogue and working with those who lead synagogues, is that we are projecting problems onto people that we want to, quote unquote, recruit as members that they're not experiencing themselves, right? 10% of Americans are lapsed Catholics. Not one of them wakes up in the morning and says, oh my God, I'm lapsed. And people don't wake up and say, oh, I wish I could become a member, but I just don't know how to find the membership form. That's not a problem that they are actually trying to solve in their lives. So people might wake up and feel like I'm driving a Bentley convertible right now, and here these people are telling me that I've got a problem to solve in my life that I really don't. And I think the more that we can actually focus on the human experience of the people that we try to serve, and try to understand what actually is the problem in their life, what is the progress they're trying to make, and what's the version of their ideal self that they want to achieve, and how can I walk alongside them, and how can I leverage all the resources that we have in the synagogue to walk alongside them to get there in such a way that actually fits with the mission and the ethos of who we are and who we're trying to be, then that's success. That's exactly what success looks like. And it's not always going to lead to more members or more money, but I actually think it can lead us to a much higher plane than either of those metrics would dictate.
Thank you so much, Elan Babchuck, for coming on. Thanks for being our first Providence guest, I think. We're outnumbering Chicago on this call for the first time. So take
Providence
that, Dan.
Represent.
Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll have to continue the conversation sometime.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful, and looking forward to continuing to follow the journey of Judaism Unbound. You guys are onto something big and beautiful, and I'm grateful that you're doing the work you do.
And with that, we're going to close out this episode, and we want to do so just as we always do by encouraging you to be in touch with us, all you out there who are listening. And there are a few ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. We also recently added a Twitter account, which you can follow at Judaism Unbound. You can hit up our website, judaismunbound.com, and also email us at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. The last plug we like to make is that you can always support us with a financial donation, either on a monthly recurring basis or just a one-time gift. And you can do either of those at judaismunbound.com/donate. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.